The rain hammered against the windshield as I sat in my car outside what used to be my office building, watching through blurred glass as security carried out the last box of my belongings. 15 years, 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, sacrificed weekends, all reduced to a cardboard box sitting in the rain. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from cold, but from the shock that still hadn't fully settled into my bones. 6 hours ago, I had walked into that building as vice president of operations. Now I was nothing. Worse than nothing. I was the man they said had embezzled $2 million from the company I had helped build from the ground up. My phone buzzed for the 100th time. I didn't need to look to know it was another message, another call, another person who had already decided I was guilty. The news had spread with the vicious speed that scandal always travels. My wife Rachel's number flashed on the screen. I reached for it, desperate to hear her voice, to hear her say she believed in me, that she knew I could never do what they were accusing me of. But when I answered, the voice on the other end wasn't the warm, supportive tone I needed. It was ice. "Don't come home, Michael," she said, her words clipped and rehearsed. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow. I'm filing for divorce. I can't be associated with a criminal. It would ruin my practice. Dr. Rachel Chen, prominent psychiatrist, winner of humanitarian awards, champion of the vulnerable and misunderstood. Unless apparently the vulnerable and misunderstood was her own husband. "Rachel, please," I heard myself say, hating the desperation in my voice. "You know me. You know I didn't do this. Marcus set me up. He forged my signatures. He—" "Stop!" Her voice cut through my explanation like a blade. "Marcus showed me everything. The offshore accounts in your name, the transfer records, the emails you sent. He was crying, Michael, crying because he trusted you and you betrayed him. You betrayed all of us. Marcus Chen, my best friend since college, my business partner, the man I had trusted with everything, the man who happened to be Rachel's brother, the man who, I now realized with a clarity that came too late, had been systematically positioning himself to take everything I had built while making me take the fall for his own crimes. Rachel, think about it. Why would I steal money when I was already making—" The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand. As the rain intensified, everything was gone. My career, my reputation, my marriage, my savings, all of it was already frozen by the company's lawyers. My friends, all mutual friends with Marcus, had stopped answering my calls by lunchtime. Even my daughter Emma, my brilliant 22-year-old daughter finishing her master's degree at Columbia, had sent me a single text. "How could you? Don't contact me." The betrayal from Marcus I could almost understand. People were capable of terrible things for money and power. But Rachel, the woman who had promised to stand by me through everything, and Emma, who I had raised, who had sat on my shoulders at every parade, who I had taught to ride a bike, to drive a car, to believe in integrity above all else, their abandonment carved something out of me that felt irreplaceable. I started the car. I had nowhere to go. The house was Rachel's family property, signed over to her by Marcus years ago in some tax arrangement I hadn't questioned because I trusted them. I had maybe $300 in my wallet. My credit cards would be frozen by morning. I drove aimlessly through the rain, through streets I'd driven 1,000 times, now foreign and hostile. Every lit window seemed to mock me. Every warm home a reminder of what I'd lost. I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place that asked no questions and accepted cash. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with suspicious eyes, took my money and slid a key across the counter without a word. Room 7. I carried my rain-soaked box inside and set it on the stained carpet. The room smelled of old cigarettes and despair. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself break, burying my face in my hands as 15 years of carefully built life crumbled to dust around me. But I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. Instead, I lay back on the scratchy comforter and stared at the water-stained ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The board meeting that morning where Marcus had presented evidence of my theft with perfect sadness in his eyes. The way he'd looked at the other board members, his voice breaking as he said, "I wish I was wrong about this. He's my best friend. But we have a duty to the company." The way they'd all looked at me, their trusted colleague. Now a stranger capable of betrayal. No one had let me speak. Security had been called before I could defend myself. The police had been waiting in the parking lot with a warrant for my arrest, though they'd agreed to let me turn myself in the next morning. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke to weak sunlight filtering through grimy curtains. For a moment, I forgot. Then it all rushed back, and the weight of it pressed me into the mattress like a physical force. I forced myself up. I had to surrender to the police by noon. I needed to find a lawyer, though I had no idea how I'd pay for one. I walked to a corner diner, using some of my dwindling cash for coffee and eggs I couldn't taste. The TV mounted in the corner was tuned to local news, and as I sat there, my own face appeared on the screen. High-powered executive accused of massive embezzlement scheme, the anchor said with that particular tone of salacious disapproval. They showed my corporate photo, making me look arrogant and cold. Then they cut to footage of Marcus, looking appropriately grave and disappointed, speaking to reporters outside our office building. "We're all devastated," he said, shaking his head. "Michael Chen," he paused, as if the name itself pained him, "was like a brother to me, my actual brother-in-law. To discover he's been systematically stealing from the company, from our employees' pension fund. It's unconscionable. Pension fund. He was claiming I'd stolen from the pension fund. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. That would turn everyone against me, even people who might have given me the benefit of the doubt. I was now the man who had stolen from working families, from people's retirement dreams. I left money on the counter and walked out into the morning. I had 3 hours before I had to turn myself in. I walked without direction, ending up in a small park on the edge of the city. It was nearly empty, just a few mothers with small children, an elderly couple feeding pigeons. I sat on a bench far from everyone else, trying to prepare myself for jail, for the trial, for the years of fighting ahead with no resources and no support. "Mind if I sit?" The voice was weathered, kind. I looked up to see an old man, maybe in his 80s, with a worn face that somehow radiated calm. He didn't wait for my answer, just settled onto the bench beside me with a soft sigh. He was dressed simply, clean but threadbare clothes, and he carried a wooden walking stick worn smooth by decades of use. We sat in silence for a while. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I saw you on the TV in the drugstore window. That corporate scandal." My stomach clenched. Even here I couldn't escape it. I waited for the judgment, the disgust. "Didn't believe a word of it," he continued conversationally. "Man who'd actually steal $2 million, he wouldn't be sitting on a park bench looking like his soul just got torn out. He'd be on a beach somewhere, or he'd be better at pretending. You're neither." I turned to look at him, this stranger offering the first kindness I'd received in 24 hours. "Thank you," I managed. "But it doesn't matter what the truth is." He covered his tracks perfectly. The old man nodded slowly. "I knew a man once, took everything from me. Business partner, back in '72. Left me with nothing but debt and 3 kids to feed. Wife got sick from the stress, died within a year." His voice was matter of fact. No self-pity, just stating history. "Spent 5 years angry, another 5 years plotting how to get revenge. Then one day, my youngest, she was maybe 7 then, she said to me, 'Daddy, your face looks mean now. It didn't used to.' And I realized the revenge, the anger. It was taking the rest of my life from me too." He pulled out a small paper bag, offering me half a sandwich. I shook my head, and he shrugged, taking a bite. So I let it go, decided I'd just live right, live honest, build what I could from nothing, work hard, treat people fair. And you know what? 30 years later, found out that partner of mine, he ended up in prison for fraud. Died there, alone, miserable. Everyone who ever knew him hating his guts. He looked at me directly then, his eyes surprisingly sharp in his weathered face. "Truth is patient, truth is slow, but truth is inevitable." Something in those words settled into my chest, a small ember of warmth in the frozen wasteland. We sat quietly for a while longer, and then the old man stood, using his walking stick for leverage. He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw something I couldn't quite name. Wisdom, maybe, or a kind of recognition. Patience outlasts deception, he said quietly. Then he added 5 more words that I would carry with me through everything that followed. Your innocence will prove itself. He walked away slowly, and I watched him go. This stranger who had given me the only hope I'd felt since yesterday. I didn't even know his name. But his words, those 5 words especially, became a mantra I repeated in my head as I walked to the police station to turn myself in. Your innocence will prove itself. The next 6 months were the darkest of my life. Jail, even a white-collar minimum security facility, was soul-crushing in ways I hadn't imagined. My court-appointed lawyer was overworked and underpaid, barely able to mount a defense against Marcus's meticulously constructed case. The divorce went through uncontested. I had nothing left to fight with. Emma refused to visit, refused to take my calls. Rachel testified at the trial, not about the evidence, but about my changed behavior in recent months, my secrecy and stress, painting a picture of a man coming apart, a man capable of desperate acts. Through it all, I maintained my innocence. I told the truth calmly, without drama, whenever asked. I explained the forged signatures, the fabricated emails, the offshore accounts that had been opened using my stolen identity. But the evidence against me was overwhelming, and I could see in the jury's eyes that they had already decided. Marcus had thought of everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, I stood to hear the verdict, and I felt a strange calm. I had told the truth. I had done everything I could. Whatever happened now was beyond my control. As the foreman read guilty on all counts, I closed my eyes and thought of the old man in the park. Patience outlasts deception. Your innocence will prove itself. But the judge had other ideas. Before sentencing, he did something unusual. He looked at me for a long moment, then looked at the evidence again. This is one of the most clear-cut cases I've seen, he said. And yet something about it troubles me, the defendant's complete lack of the usual markers of this crime. No lifestyle inflation, no hidden purchases, no changed behavior until the alleged theft was discovered. I'm going to order an independent audit of the company's finances before sentencing. 30-day continuance. Marcus's face, which had been composed and appropriately somber throughout the trial, flickered for just a moment. I saw it, a flash of fear, quickly suppressed. My lawyer, surprised by this unusual move, nodded slowly. That's good for us, he whispered. Very unusual, but good. I went back to jail, but something had shifted. The judge's words had been the first hint that someone in power might see what I saw. The perfection of the frame-up was itself suspicious. Real criminals made mistakes. Marcus's case against me had no mistakes. The independent auditor was a woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant with a reputation for being absolutely incorruptible. She spent 4 weeks going through every transaction, every account, every digital footprint. And she found something Marcus hadn't anticipated. He had been too thorough. Every piece of evidence pointed to me, with no alternative suspects, no loose ends, no complexity. In her experience, real embezzlement was messy. This was surgical. More importantly, she found something else. The offshore accounts in my name had been opened using my identity, yes, but the digital fingerprints, the actual computer used to open them, came from Marcus's home IP address, not mine. He'd covered the trail expertly, but not perfectly. The computer had been his personal laptop, and when she dug deeper into that laptop's history, she found drafts of the forged emails, attempts at reproducing my signature, research into how to set up untraceable offshore accounts. The police obtained a warrant. They seized Marcus's home computer, his office computers, his phone. The case against him started to build, first slowly, then with gathering momentum. But Marcus was clever. He went to the district attorney before they could arrest him, claiming he had discovered troubling discrepancies in the accounts and had been investigating them himself. He tried to position himself as the hero who had uncovered additional evidence. It didn't work. Dr. Mitchell's report was devastating, and the district attorney, embarrassed by how close they'd come to imprisoning an innocent man, went after Marcus with everything they had. The story broke on a Wednesday afternoon. I was still in jail, awaiting a new hearing, when my lawyer came to tell me Marcus had been arrested, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and framing an innocent person. The charges against me were being dropped. I sat in that gray visiting room, listening to words I dreamed of hearing for 6 months, and I felt empty. Not happy, not relieved, just hollowed out. What about the money? I asked. Can we get my reputation back? My lawyer, who had warmed to me over the months as he'd come to believe in my innocence, nodded. There's more. They found all of it, Michael. The $2 million is in Marcus's accounts. He never moved it out of the country like he claimed you did. He was planning to, but he hadn't yet. And there's more. He'd been stealing for years, little bits here and there. The total is close to $5 million. He used your salary and bonuses to justify some of his lifestyle inflation to his wife, made it seem like you were both doing well. The company is already talking about a settlement with you for wrongful termination and damages. I was released that afternoon. The media, which had crucified me 6 months earlier, now wanted my story of injustice and vindication. I declined all interviews. I walked out of that facility into autumn sunlight, 7 months after I'd lost everything, and I felt like a stranger to myself. The next weeks brought a cascade of revelations that spread far beyond the embezzlement. Rachel called me finally, 2 days after my release. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Michael. Her voice was small, nothing like the confident, professional tone I'd known for 20 years. I need to tell you something. I need to tell you everything. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. She looked terrible. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes. She couldn't meet my gaze as she talked. The affair had started 2 years ago, she said. Not with a random person, but with James Hartley, one of Marcus's other business partners. Marcus had known about it, had encouraged it, even facilitated it. The goal had been to isolate me, to make sure Rachel would side with Marcus when the time came for him to make his move. He told me you were having an affair, she said, tears streaming down her face. He showed me fake evidence, text messages he'd fabricated, receipts from hotels where he said you'd been with another woman. He convinced me you were planning to leave me, take your money, and run. The embezzlement accusation, he sold it to me as you trying to hide assets before the divorce. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because I felt guilty about James, and if you were the bad guy, then I wasn't. I listened without speaking. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to pour out all the pain of her betrayal. But mostly, I just felt tired. And Emma? I asked quietly. Rachel's face crumpled. He told her the same things, showed her the same fake evidence, convinced her you'd been living a double life, stealing not just from the company but from us. She was so angry, Michael. She felt like her whole childhood had been a lie. And you let her believe it, I said. You, her mother, let her believe her father was a criminal, rather than tell her the truth that you were having an affair. I know, she whispered. I know, and I can never take that back. I destroyed our family because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. As the full picture emerged, it got worse. Marcus hadn't just targeted me. He'd been systematically manipulating everyone in his orbit for years. The investigation into his finances revealed a web of fraud, manipulation, and betrayal. He'd stolen from other partners, falsified reports to investors, evaded taxes. His house of cards had been wobbling for years, and I had been his planned escape route, the fall guy who would take the blame while he fled the country with millions. But my unexpected resilience, my refusal to confess or take a plea deal, had slowed his timeline. And the judge's unusual decision to order the independent audit had trapped him. By the time Dr. Mitchell started digging, it was too late for him to run. His passport was flagged, his accounts frozen. The money he'd meant to use for his escape was seized as evidence. Emma called me 3 weeks after my release. When I heard her voice, something broke in me that had held firm through everything else. She was crying, apologizing, saying she'd been so wrong, so stupid. How could she have believed those things about me? I let her cry. Then I said, Emma, I forgive you. You were lied to by people you trusted, but I need you to understand something. I spent 6 months in jail, and in that whole time, You never once questioned whether the uncle who bought you expensive presents and took you on trips might be lying. You never once questioned whether your father, who taught you about integrity and honesty your whole life, deserved the benefit of the doubt. You believed the worst of me instantly, and that hurt worse than the jail cell. I know, Dad. I know, and I'm so sorry. I forgive you, I said again, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. We'll rebuild our relationship, but it's going to take time. You need to understand why you were so quick to believe the worst. You need to figure out why gifts and trips meant more than character. She came to see me the next day. We sat in my small, temporary apartment. I couldn't go back to the house, couldn't even bear to see it. And we talked for hours, really talked, maybe for the first time in years. She told me about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to live up to the Chen family name, how Marcus had always seemed so successful and confident while I seemed stressed and worried, how Rachel had confided in her about problems in the marriage that made Marcus's accusations seem more believable. The trial against Marcus was swift and brutal. Unlike my case, where I'd had an overworked public defender, the prosecution brought its full weight down on him. They had evidence of everything: the embezzlement, the fraud, the forgeries, the identity theft. They had his computer records, his phone records, testimony from his secretary who he'd pressured into falsifying documents. They even had evidence he'd been planning to flee the country, with tickets booked to a non-extradition country under a false name. I attended every day of the trial. Not for revenge, I'd let that poison go, as the old man in the park had advised. But I needed to see it through. I needed to witness truth being spoken in a courtroom after so many months of lies being believed. Marcus looked at me once across the courtroom, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. Not of prison, though certainly that was part of it, but fear of being exposed, of having his carefully constructed mask ripped away. His whole life had been built on manipulation and deception, and now everyone could see what was underneath. Rachel testified against him, explaining how he'd manipulated her, used her affair to control her, position her to support his lies. James Hartley, facing his own legal troubles for his role in Marcus's schemes, testified about how Marcus had orchestrated the affair, had practically thrown his sister at James to create leverage. Other business partners came forward with their own stories of Marcus's manipulation, his subtle threats, his way of making people complicit in small lies until they were trapped in bigger ones. The verdict was guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Marcus finally spoke. He looked directly at me and said, "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry for everything. I was drowning in debt, in poor decisions, and instead of facing them with honor, I took the coward's way. I destroyed my best friend, my sister's marriage, my niece's trust in her father. And for what? Money I never even got to spend, an escape I never got to make. I threw away everything that mattered, and I deserve everything that's coming to me." The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, with restitution ordered for all stolen funds. Marcus was 53 years old. He would be nearly 70 when he got out, if he made it that long. His reputation was destroyed, his marriage over. His wife had filed for divorce within days of his arrest. His children wanted nothing to do with him. He had lost everything, just as I had, but with one crucial difference: he was guilty. The company offered me my job back, with a promotion and a settlement of $3 million for wrongful termination, emotional distress, and damage to my reputation. I considered it for about 5 seconds before declining. I couldn't go back to that building, sit in those offices, work with people who had believed the worst of me without question. Some of them had apologized, but many had simply acted as if the whole thing had been an unfortunate misunderstanding, rather than a near destruction of an innocent man's life. Instead, I took the settlement money and started over. I consulted for companies on ethical business practices and internal controls. I spoke at universities about corporate fraud and the importance of due process. I volunteered at an innocence project, helping people who'd been wrongly convicted navigate the legal system. My life became smaller in some ways. I didn't want the corporate ladder anymore, didn't want the stress and politics of executive life. But it became richer too, more meaningful. Emma and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. She took a year off from her studies to volunteer at the Innocence Project with me. She said she needed to understand what I'd been through, needed to see what false accusations did to people. We grew closer through that shared work then. We'd been in years. She met other families torn apart by lies, other children who'd believed the worst of innocent parents. It changed her, sobered her, but also made her more compassionate. Rachel and I never reconciled romantically, but we found a kind of peace. The divorce was already final, and neither of us wanted to undo that. Too much damage had been done, but we learned to co-parent Emma, even in her 20s, and we learned to forgive each other. She had her own reckoning to face. The affair ended badly, her practice suffered when the details came out, she lost friends and professional standing. The universe had its own way of balancing scales. A year after my release, on a warm spring afternoon, I found myself back at that same park bench, where I'd met the old man. I'd come back dozens of times over the months, hoping to see him again, to thank him for his words that had carried me through the darkest time. I'd asked around, shown his description to the park regulars, but no one knew who I was talking about. Some days I wondered if he'd been real at all, or if I'd hallucinated him in my despair. But on this particular day, as I sat on that bench reading a book, I heard a familiar voice. "Mind if I sit?" I looked up, and there he was, a year older, a little more weathered, but unmistakably the same man. My throat tightened with emotion. "Please," I managed. He settled onto the bench with the same soft sigh, set his walking stick beside him. We sat in silence for a moment, and then he said, "I saw you on the news. Vindicated. Your partner in prison. You got your life back." "I did," I said. "Thanks in part to you. What you said to me that day, it kept me going through everything that followed." He waved a hand dismissively. "I just told you what I learned the hard way. Truth has a way of surfacing. Takes its own sweet time, but it gets there. Your innocence will prove itself," I quoted. Those 5 words became my mantra. He smiled, a gentle expression that crinkled his weathered face. Did it prove itself then? It did. Not through anything I did, really. I just refused to confess to something I didn't do. Refused to take a plea deal, and eventually someone looked closely enough to see the truth. "That's doing something," he said. "These days, a lot of people would have taken the plea, done a few years, gotten out early. You stood firm. That takes courage." We talked for an hour, and this time I learned his name, Henry, and his story. The business partner who had destroyed him in 1972 had indeed died in prison, just as he'd said. Henry had spent the decades since then working as a carpenter, raising his kids alone, building a quiet, honest life. He'd never gotten rich, never achieved anything the world would call remarkable. But he'd earned the respect of everyone who knew him, had helped dozens of people over the years with his calm wisdom and practical help. "You know what I learned?" he said as we prepared to part ways. "Revenge is exhausting. Hate is exhausting. But truth just sits there, patient as stone, waiting for its moment. And when that moment comes, truth doesn't need any help from us. It speaks for itself, loud and clear." He stood to leave, and I stood with him. "Thank you, Henry, for your words, for your wisdom. You probably saved me from drowning in bitterness." He shook my hand with his weathered one. "You saved yourself, son. You chose patience over rage, truth over revenge. That's all any of us can do in this life. The rest takes care of itself." I watched him walk away again, this time with a sense of completion rather than desperation. His words had proven true in ways I couldn't have imagined that terrible day a year ago. Marcus had destroyed himself far more thoroughly than I ever could have destroyed him. His own greed, his own deception, his own elaborate lies had built a prison more complete than any revenge I might have planned. 3 years later, I remarried a woman named Sarah, a teacher who'd been through her own betrayal and understood the long road back from broken trust. Emma finished her degree and joined a nonprofit fighting wrongful convictions. Rachel found her own peace, dedicating her practice to helping families recover from trauma and betrayal. We all moved forward, carrying our scars, but no longer bleeding from them. I heard through the legal grapevine that Marcus had been denied parole at his first hearing. The parole board cited his complete lack of genuine remorse. His apology in court had been his last performance, and once in prison, he'd reverted to blaming everyone else for his downfall. He'd aged badly, I heard, looked 20 years older than his time. The weight of his guilt, even unacknowledged, had carved itself into his features. I felt pity when I heard that, not satisfaction. That surprised me. But Henry had been right. I'd let go of the rage and the desire for revenge so completely that even news of Marcus's suffering didn't bring me joy. It just made me sad for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. Sad for all the waste, all the destruction, all the unnecessary pain. On the 5-year anniversary of that terrible night when I'd lost everything, I stood in my small backyard with Sarah, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Emma was coming for dinner, bringing her new boyfriend for us to meet. My consulting business was thriving. The book I'd written about ethical leadership and corporate fraud prevention had become required reading in several business schools. Life wasn't perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes about the jail cell, still felt a flash of panic when I saw a police car. But it was good, real, built on truth. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, slipping her hand into mine. "That old man in the park," I said. "How he told me patience outlasts deception. How he said my innocence would prove itself. I used to wonder if he was just trying to make me feel better, saying words that sounded nice but might not be true. And now? Now I know he was right, not just about my case, but about life. Marcus had more money, more power, more connections. He had a perfect plan. But truth is patient, and truth is inevitable. He could delay it, hide it, distort it for a while, but eventually truth spoke louder than all his lies, and I didn't have to do anything but refuse to become a liar myself. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Your innocence proved itself." "It did," I said. "And karma, not the mystical kind, but the natural consequences of actions. Karma did the rest. Marcus destroyed himself. I just had to wait." The doorbell rang, Emma arriving with her boyfriend. Life calling us back from reflection to the present moment. As we walked inside to greet them, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the suffering, but for what it had taught me. About patience, about truth, about the kind of justice that doesn't require revenge because it emerges naturally from the fabric of reality itself. That night, surrounded by laughter and good food and people I loved, I thought about the night I'd lost everything. How I'd sat in that motel room, destroyed and alone, certain my life was over. How I'd met an old man on a park bench who had given me 5 words that became my anchor. "Your innocence will prove itself." He'd been right. My innocence had proved itself. And in losing everything, I'd found something more valuable than anything Marcus had taken. I'd found the kind of integrity that doesn't crumble under pressure, the kind of patience that outlasts deception, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you stood for truth, even when truth seemed to be losing. Karma, I'd learned, wasn't about the universe punishing bad people. It was simpler and more inevitable than that. Karma was just the natural result of actions, playing out over time. Marcus's lies had required more lies to sustain them, more manipulation, more deception, until the whole structure became too complex to maintain. My truth had required only one thing, that I keep telling it, no matter what. In the end, patience had outlasted deception. Truth had been inevitable. My innocence had proved itself. And those 5 words from an old man on a park bench had carried me through the darkness to a new beginning built on foundations that couldn't be shaken by lies or betrayal or injustice. That was the greatest victory of all, not that Marcus had been punished, but that I had remained myself through the storm. I had refused to become bitter, refused to seek revenge, refused to let injustice turn me into something I wasn't. The night I lost everything, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. A life built on truth. A life that couldn't be taken away by anyone's lies. A life that was finally, genuinely mine.